Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit more in depth about joint ventures and partnerships. This video is a follow-up to the video that I posted earlier this week with my friends Bailey and Adrian of Crooked Root Designs, where we spoke about their partnership and what they have done right in business, the success that it has been so far. So I felt kind of bad because earlier this week I also posted on Instagram about their video, and I said that partnerships reminded me of, when you had to do group projects in college or in high school or wherever. And it's great in theory because you have somebody to share the work with, but if that person doesn't carry up, or carry their side of the bargain, or pull their weight, then the partnership can kind of grow sour pretty quickly. And I said that because as an attorney, anytime you're really dealing with partnership issues, you are coming in to clean up a mess that has already been created, where you've had, mismanaged expectations or just different things that have caused the relationship to go south pretty bad. Or you're there to help prevent those situations. So in that scenario, my job is literally to think of the worst case scenarios that could happen and help draft agreements between the parties that would prevent those scenarios from happening. So I felt like I needed to clarify that. And while I might be slightly tainted about what a partnership is really like, they actually can be really, really beneficial, and they can be by far the best business decision that you can make. They can help you really get things done much better than you could ever do on your own for many reasons. So today I wanted to kind of talk to you about what it takes to get started in a partnership, and what it takes to actually continue that partnership along and stay legal along the way. So before we get started, I just want to talk a little bit about why you might want to think about getting into a partnership. Some things that come to mind for me are, one, you have somebody who might balance out your personality or your strengths very well, who would be able to pick up maybe, say, the administrative side of things when you're maybe more primarily, creatively minded. So first I want to talk a little bit about why you might want to consider entering into a partnership, because I truly do think in some scenarios they're the best way that you can possibly get your work done, or achieve the goal that you have in mind. Some of those situations might be if you find somebody whose skills complement yours very well or complement your flaws very well. For example, like the girls from Crooked Roots Designs were speaking about earlier. One of the girls is very creative, and she is the florist who actually usually puts together the flower arrangements, while the other partner in the partnership is much more type A, kind of administratively minded, and she can handle the back end administrative type of stuff. Other reasons why you might want to consider a partnership are, if you want to gain entry into a new market, you can partner with somebody who might be a little bit more advanced in the market that you have your sights set on. And that would just be an easier way for you to get credibility in that market. Another might have to do with financing. It might be easier if you're bringing in investors or talking about bringing in investors. It might be much easier to do so if you have another partner to help you with those, raising the capital and making those connections. So another thing that I want to say before we get started is I want to distinguish the difference between a partnership and a joint venture, because I hear the two terms confused pretty often. A partnership is what I would classify as something that is more long-term. It's a business formation. That's when you want to start a business together. A joint venture, on the other hand, is something that is a little bit more temporary. It's maybe when you're entering into a transaction or just a short-term type deal with somebody as a partnership, but something that kind of has a definite end date and it's not an actual business. So what scenarios do you need to protect against? And this is kind of just the mental checklist that I need to run through as an attorney anytime that I'm speaking with anybody about starting a partnership or entering into a joint venture. The first thing that you need to keep in mind is that you need to have everything in writing. When you're dealing with business, things can unfortunately get personal pretty quickly, and you have to be able to manage expectations between the two parties. So what that means is we need to have a contract in place. There's just no way around it. I've actually litigated a few cases in court dealing with partnerships, where the partners, in one case in particular, the partners had been partners for 25 years doing some pretty high-end, very sophisticated business transactions, and they didn't have any sort of written partnership agreement in place. And in this instance in particular, I was actually defending the partnership, and we had to sit through an 8-hour deposition that took a couple days overall. And the opposing counsel was able to just grill the two parties on the two partners that didn't have the partnership agreement, just on the inconsistencies and the different, expectations that each party had for the case or for the partnership. And it ended up really harming them in the long run. They weren't able to protect the partnership from litigation. And if they had had everything in writing, it would have been much simpler. And I would dare say we wouldn't have had to spend 8 hours or 16 hours total in depositions to talk about it. So whatever you do, you have to keep in mind that you have to have your partnership agreement in writing. So if you are entering into just a joint venture with somebody, what do you need to have in writing? You need to have a contract written up between the two of you. You need to talk about the date that the work will get started. You need to describe the exact work that will be entered into under this joint venture. You're going to need to talk about how money is going to be split up, what happens, how debts are going to be allocated if you lose money on the deal. You're going to need to talk about your exit strategies. But it's important to have that in writing, because all too often, I think, in the creative community in particular, we see people, we form friendships with people and we start to rely on them pretty heavily. And while everything works out at the beginning, sometimes business gets tough, and I see it all the time. I literally see it every day, and it drives me insane. But I see all the time where people just will ghost on their partner. They will just, up and leave. And because there's no partnership agreement in place, or no joint venture agreement in place, sometimes they're able to do that. And it leaves the other partner, who's usually the one that's been pulling their weight anyways, or who has put in the capital anyways, who they've put in more skin in the game overall. That's the person that gets burned every single time. So by having all of these terms written out in advance, you're able to prevent those types of scenarios from happening. So anytime that you are collaborating with anybody in any capacity, you need to have it in writing. You need to have, even if it's as simple as an email. Of course, I want you to have something more formal than an email, but start with that. Just have it in writing so that you all both know the terms that you're entering into, that you're agreeing to, and kind of eliminate a lot of the confusion on the front end. Okay, so second issue is partnerships, and this is where we kind of up the ante a little bit. If you are entering into a partnership, a formal, business structure with a partner, you have to have a partnership agreement in place. And there are specific things that need to be covered in this partnership agreement. The first thing that needs to be covered is how are you going to handle when the business starts to grow? Because of course that's what we like to think would happen with any business. But this partnership agreement needs to be flexible. It needs to be something that can grow with the business as it expands, that would still be able to, flexible enough that it would be able to define your roles now, and it would be able to transcend that growth and define your roles as the business grows. Flexibility is going to include things like, what are you going to do when you need to start outsourcing things or hiring new employees or independent contractors? The key here again is just that you have to manage expectations with your partner. You don't want some sort of dinky document in place that's good for right now, but if the business grows at all, you outgrow the partnership agreement. It's going to cause friction. You're going to have more money on the table, and that's just going to kind of add intensity to any sort of partnership relationship that you have with somebody. And it's more than possible to have partnership agreements in place that are flexible and that can grow with your business. And as an attorney, those are some of my, the most fun partnership agreements to draft, because one, it's fun to actually work with the partners involved and talk about this growth that we all know is going to happen. It's fun to plan for that. It's fun to kind of see it become more of a reality. And for me, it's fun to kind of like play with that language, I guess, for lack of a better word, or get creative with it a little bit, and build something that will really grow with the partnership. So that's issue number one, is make sure you have a partnership agreement that will stay flexible and that will grow with your partnership as you need it to. Number two, you need to define very, very, very explicitly the tasks between the two partners. Just like Adrian and Bailey spoke about in their video or in their interview earlier this week, they do a fantastic job of this, and this is the exact reason why I wanted to interview them in the first place. They do a really good job of breaking up the tasks between kind of what we were joking about in the video as the type B and the type A tasks. They have one person who is the creative lead. She is the one who arranges all of the floral designs. She's the one who chooses what flowers are going to be delivered. She's the one who decides, what flowers are needed for each arrangement. While the other partner, Adrian in this case, is jokingly the type A partner. She's the one who has the business brain, and I mean no offense to Bailey in that at all, of course, but she is the one who is on top of the taxes. She's keeping up with the books. She's keeping up with the contract. She's kind of taking the direction of, I don't want to say taking the direction of the business, but she's kind of taking the administrative direction of the business on. So that's not always, that's not something that every partnership can handle. Not everybody is split into those tasks those talents perfectly. So you need to decide if you want to, define your separation of powers, I guess, between tasks or skills or talents, how you want to define them. If it's just somebody needs to handle the books each week while somebody needs to handle the contracts each week, it can be something along those lines, but you have to have those defined very clearly from the outset so that each person knows their roles. And this isn't just so that you keep from stepping on each other's toes per se, but this also helps just build momentum into the partnership inherently. Because if each person knows their roles, and especially if those roles are built upon that person's talents, then, it's just intuitive. The partnership's going to just continue to grow, again, much faster than it can ever grow with just one of those people running the business on their own. So that's number two. Make sure you have your tasks or your talents or your skills, however you want to define it, make sure you have those divvied up at the outset. Okay, so we've gone through our first two. Number three, and I have some notes here, so if you see me looking down, that's why. Number three is really important, and I touched on it a little bit earlier, but you are going to need to have a really honest conversation with your partner and talk about your best and your worst case scenarios. You're going to need to talk about what are you going to do, we like to say when the business succeeds. What are you going to do when the business grows? How are you going to handle, again, those hiring decisions? How are you going to handle, more money coming in? Who are your first hires going to be? Those types of scenarios. That being said, we don't like to talk about it, but it's important to keep in mind. How are you going to handle if the business goes south? The business is probably not going to have the perfect, upward trajectory. So it's important to talk about those scenarios when things might get kind of tough. How many months are you going to allow the partnership to be in the red before you both, kind of give up and go your separate? Or when are you going to need to have an exit plan? When are you guys going to both agree to throw in the towel and, have that plan in place so that there are no hurt feelings and you know what to expect when you've reached that point in the relationship, if you ever do, which of course we would hope that you would not. Another thing to keep in mind is if you have those dry spells, those maybe kind of rough times in the partnership or in the business. What are the partnership's rules on side businesses? Are you allowed to, or do you all agree that you can have side businesses running at the same time? Is one person going to be kind of that typical entrepreneur spirit that I think most of us can relate to, where we continuously have business ideas and we love to just keep, churning out new businesses? Is one partner going to be resentful of the other partner if they keep, creating these side hustles? If so, are there parameters in place? Or if it is allowed between the partners, are there parameters in place defining, what kinds of side hustles are allowed? Are you going to have kind of some sort of non-compete clause in place that defines, whether or not the partner can have a business that too closely ties into what your partnership does? These are all really important things to define at the outset because these are scenarios that could happen anytime. Okay, number 4 is all about money. And this is the most intuitive one of all 4, most likely. You need to talk about how profits are going to be distributed. Are you going to cut a salary for each partner? Or is it just going to be strictly on a profit base? Are you going to have some sort of profit share in place? Who is going to pay to start the business? We all know it costs a lot of money to actually start a business. Who's going to bear those expenses? Who is going to, keep bearing those expenses until the business starts to make a profit? And if so, is that person allowed to be paid back first? There's a lot of questions that go into it, but money is where a lot of the hurt feelings come from in business. So of course, this is maybe the most important thing that you need to define. Okay, and last but not least, I believe this is number 5 on our list. How long is your partnership going to be around? Is there a definite end date, or is it what we call a perpetual agreement or a perpetual business entity that is around just until you say that it's time to dissolve it and wind it up? If it ends, or when it ends, how are you going to distribute the money in the bank account? How are you going to distribute those profits? An issue that comes up quite a bit is how are you going to distribute, or who has ownership of the intellectual property that the partnership has created? Anything that has been trademarked or copyrighted, you need to have agreements in place defining exactly how those are going to be passed on to one of the partners or both of the partners, however you want to do that. If one partner is approached with a new business opportunity, are they allowed to leave the partnership to take it? How are you going to handle new opportunities entering the arena? Again, we don't like to talk about exit strategies in business because we like to pretend like, everything is kind of rainbows and puppies and unicorns, but it's my job to unfortunately talk about those things that we don't always like to talk about at the outset, but that are so important to define. So it's really important to talk about your exit strategy. At the end of the day, you are entering into this partnership because you want to work really closely with this person. So even if you're not really good friends on a personal level, it's probably not something where you are going to, want to just completely destroy and tarnish your relationship with each other if or when the partnership does have to end. So it's really important to talk about that before you even get started. Again, all you have to do is just manage expectations between the two parties. So that kind of wraps up my just behind the scenes, just a peek into my brain when it comes to how I approach partnerships and joint ventures. Again, you're probably tired of hearing me say it, but it all comes down to having it in writing. Have your agreements in writing, and of course, obviously, always have an agreement in place at the outset. Get that agreement in writing and you can manage those expectations. You are going to avoid the vast majority of issues that I see come across partnerships and joint ventures, and you can protect yourself and the business from the scenarios like, the person ghosting on the other partner, or someone getting a new opportunity, or somebody putting in too much of the money at the outset. Those are all avoidable situations. And having that agreement in place is the best way to just eliminate them before they even have the opportunity to arise. So that kind of wraps up everything that I have about partnerships and joint ventures. If you ever have any questions, you can always email me at hello@pagehulse.com, and I will be back next week with a new video. Thanks.